Lewis Hamilton signs with Red Bull, terminates his contract with Ferrari immediately, stay until the end to find out all the reasons behind this shocking turn of events in F1. Just a few hours after the checkered flag dropped at the Austrian Grand Prix, a race that left Lewis Hamilton emotionally drained, professionally disillusioned, and physically exhausted, an invisible shift began to take place behind the closed doors of the Formula One paddock. From the outside, it looked like just another difficult weekend in red. For fans, commentators, and even most insiders, the narrative seemed clear: Ferrari had underdelivered again. The car was not competitive. Strategy was muddled. Communication was inconsistent. But buried beneath the surface of that familiar script was something entirely different. A final straw had been pulled. And in the quiet shadows of the paddock corridors, the trajectory of Hamilton's legendary career was beginning to pivot. The weekend had begun with all the outward signs of hope. Ferrari had brought a modest upgrade to Spielberg, one that promised marginal gains in corner exit speed and rear-end stability. The engineering team had spent hours fine-tuning the setup based on simulation data. Hamilton, ever the professional, walked into the media center on Thursday with a confident stride and a measured optimism in his voice. He talked about progress, about teamwork, about how every weekend was a new opportunity to extract more from the package. There was a hint of belief, fragile but genuine, that maybe, just maybe, the corner was finally about to be turned. But from the very first practice session, reality began to bite. Hamilton struggled to find balance in the car. Corner entry was vague, mid-corner grip unstable, and top-end speed lacking on the straights. The upgrade seemed ineffective or worse, misaligned with the car's underlying architecture. Tire degradation was unusually high, particularly on the medium compound. Hamilton's long-run pace was inconsistent, and any advantage in qualifying was evaporating within the first 10 laps of a race stint. Still, he pressed on. He buried his frustration, gave detailed feedback in debriefs, and worked late into the night with his race engineer and data analysts. He even spent additional time in the simulator on Saturday morning, hoping to unlock something, anything, that might deliver a turnaround. But qualifying yielded a mediocre result that placed him deeper in the field than he should have been, surrounded by cars with more effective race pace and superior straight-line performance. And once the lights went out on Sunday, the story became all too familiar. Hamilton fought hard. He defended aggressively, overtook bravely when chances came, and extended his stints to squeeze every drop out of his tires. But the car simply didn't respond. There was no extra grip to lean on when it mattered most. The battery deployment strategy was suboptimal. The DRS zones provided no salvation. He radioed in multiple times during the race, questioning why he was being undercut, why the tires weren't switching on, why he was being told to push when there was no grip. The answers came slowly, laced with uncertainty. "We're analyzing, Lewis. Still reviewing strategy. We're discussing options." None of it sounded confident. None of it sounded like a team in control. When he finally crossed the line, nowhere near the points he believed he had the skill to achieve, the silence on the radio spoke louder than words. The engineer offered a thank you, the usual nod to effort. Hamilton didn't reply. His breathing was heavy, not just from physical exertion, but from the emotional weight of another race gone to waste. By the time he climbed out of the car, his body language had changed. Gone was the subtle nod to mechanics. Gone was the hopeful glance toward the pit wall. Instead, there was a cold distance, a quiet storm forming behind his eyes. His words to the press afterward were brief, surgical, and laced with quiet fury. "We need to look into everything. We can't keep doing this. I gave it everything and more, but the car just wasn't there." No excuses. No elaboration. Just a pointed message aimed at those inside the red garage. What no journalist, fan, or even teammate realized at that moment was that Hamilton had already made his decision. Austria wasn't just another disappointment, it was the tipping point. Behind the scenes, Hamilton had been trying to remain patient for months. He'd invested time, energy, and reputation into the project of Ferrari. From the moment he joined the Scuderia, he knew it would require a long-term effort. He wasn't expecting instant glory, but he expected progress. He expected transparency. He expected a shared vision. But week after week, he found himself in meeting rooms being told why things weren't working, why the aero balance was off, why wind tunnel numbers weren't matching CFD projections, why the mechanical grip wasn't translating on track. And week after week, he saw the same symptoms, the same contradictions, the same apologies. No plan ever seemed to reach execution. No fix ever seemed to stick. He worked overtime. Simulator sessions stretched long into the evening. He collaborated closely with the factory, even helping junior drivers and simulator testers refine their feedback processes. He tried to lead from the front, not just in pace but in presence. He spoke to mechanics with respect, encouraged young engineers, even took time to visit Maranello more often than his contract demanded. But nothing changed. The team would nod, take notes, say they understood, and then deliver the same flawed package race after race. After qualifying in Austria, Hamilton pulled aside one of his most trusted inner circle, someone who had been with him since his early McLaren days. "I feel like I'm driving the same problems every weekend," he said quietly, staring at the ground. "We talk solutions, but all I see are symptoms. It's like trying to build a house with no foundation. Every layer just sinks." His disillusionment wasn't emotional, it was surgical, analytical. Lewis Hamilton doesn't make impulsive decisions. He evaluates, waits, listens, then acts. And after Austria, he acted. By the time the race debrief began late Sunday evening, he had already sent messages to his management team. Discreet inquiries were made. Calls were placed. Conversations that had been hypothetical for months suddenly became real. His representatives began reaching out, not just to rival teams, but to key figures in technical departments across the paddock. The question wasn't just, is there interest? It was, if he were available, what infrastructure would support him? What development direction would you pursue with him in the car? How much decision-making power would he have? Meanwhile, inside Ferrari, confusion began to grow. Some sensed it. A few suspected something had shifted. But no one had evidence. Hamilton continued to behave professionally. He thanked the team in the garage. He shook hands with engineers. But the warmth was gone. The sparkle, the shared vision, that was fading. He didn't need to make a dramatic exit. Hamilton isn't theatrical. He plays the long game. But in his mind, a new chapter had already begun. And if Austria was the catalyst, then the rest of the paddock had better be ready. Because Lewis Hamilton was no longer just searching for performance. He was preparing for reinvention. For legacy. For one final pursuit of greatness, on his terms. Behind the cold walls of the Ferrari hospitality unit, well away from the cameras, the interviews, and the carefully scripted press releases, a storm had been brewing for months. What had started as subtle tension, occasional glances across the pit wall, awkward silences in strategy briefings, and questions left unanswered during post-race reviews, had gradually evolved into a deep, persistent frustration that Lewis Hamilton could no longer contain. He had joined Ferrari with a fire in his heart and the weight of legacy on his shoulders, believing that he could lift the prancing horse back to its rightful place at the top of Formula One. But as the season dragged on, as missed opportunities mounted and strategic indecision reared its head again and again, that belief had started to erode, bit by bit, moment by moment, race by race. By the time the Austrian Grand Prix concluded, Hamilton was no longer simply frustrated. He was livid. Furious not because he lacked the pace, but because the machinery and decision-making surrounding him failed to rise to the level of his own relentless standards. Once again, Ferrari's conservative development approach had left him outmatched. While McLaren and Red Bull introduced sweeping aerodynamic upgrades that immediately transformed their performance windows, Ferrari remained stuck in a cycle of slow, hesitant updates. Changes that arrived too late, delivered too little, or came with compromises that made no sense from a racing standpoint. Every debrief turned into a defensive war of words. Every feedback session felt like it was being filtered through layers of internal politics and engineering bureaucracy. But it wasn't just the development path that had pushed Hamilton to the edge. It was the race management, or rather, the lack of it. Austria was a textbook case in how to throw away a race through indecision. Hamilton had questioned the strategy early when tire degradation became obvious in the first stint, suggesting they play the long game and protect the tires. Instead, the team urged him to push, a call that compromised not just the rubber but the timing of the pit windows. When they finally brought him in, it was 2 laps too late, dropping him into traffic and handing track position to the very rivals they had vowed to beat. And then came the final insult, a complete breakdown in communication over track limits. Warnings had come, yes, but they were couched in soft language, never once punctuated by the kind of urgency a driver needs in the heat of battle. There was no definitive call, no final warning alert, no alarm bell to stop him from overstepping again. Post-race, when the 10-second time penalty was confirmed, Hamilton sat in silence, helmet still on, face like stone. He didn't need to speak. His eyes told the entire story. Enough was enough. What happened next didn't just signal frustration. It signaled the potential end of one chapter, and the beginning of another. That same evening, while most teams were packing up equipment and preparing for the next round, a private jet, matte black, unmarked, and filed under a code name, departed quietly from a secluded terminal in Salzburg. There were no team colors on display. No media. No entourage. Only 2 men boarded that aircraft, each carrying their own share of history, pride, and unfinished business. On board was Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion, still in his travel gear, still carrying the weight of another wasted weekend. Seated across from him, calmly flipping through notes and sipping a glass of still water, was Christian Horner, Red Bull Racing's master strategist, and a man whose rivalry with Hamilton once defined an entire era of Formula One. This wasn't a meeting born of chance. It had been months in the making, subtle messages exchanged through intermediaries, casual words in paddock corridors that said more than they seemed, and eventually, encrypted communication that hinted at something far more concrete. Austria was the breaking point. And Horner, ever the opportunist, had waited with surgical precision for just such a moment. When it came, he wasted no time. The message he sent earlier that day was short, calculated, and utterly compelling. "If you're still serious, I'm ready." The reply came almost instantly. "Let's talk. Tonight." The flight to Milton Keynes was smooth but quiet. No small talk. No reminiscing. Just 2 individuals who understood the stakes, speaking the language of champions. Horner kept his tone even, deliberate, the voice of someone who had closed some of the sport's biggest deals. "You've built empires, Lewis. You've rewritten the record books. But I don't believe for a second you're finished. You're not just a great, you're a weapon. And weapons need to be in the right hands, surrounded by the right minds, at the right time. That time is now." Hamilton stared out the window for a while, watching the stars above the Austrian Alps, his reflection staring back at him through the cabin glass. When he finally turned, his voice was calm, but unmistakably resolute. "I've given everything to this sport. I've driven through heartbreak, chaos, politics, and miracles. I've been loyal, first to McLaren, then to Mercedes, and now Ferrari. But loyalty can't come at the expense of purpose. I didn't come back to this grid to watch the season slip through my fingers while we wait for a concept to mature. I came to fight. I came to win. And right now, there's only one team that's ready for that fight." Horner leaned forward, his fingers laced together. "You already know what we're building. The car is a monster. The technical team? Ruthless. Our power unit is stable, scalable, and built for what's coming in 2026. But this isn't about next year. This is about finishing your story the right way. You deserve the ending that matches everything you've done. Come here, and we'll give it to you." For the first time during the flight, Hamilton smiled. But it wasn't the smile of someone making a decision lightly. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with it already. The smile of a man who had finally decided to stop waiting. No signatures were exchanged that night. No contracts printed. But something far more powerful was agreed upon, a shift in trajectory. A decision that would send shockwaves through the paddock once it surfaced. A decision that would reignite rivalries, reframe championship battles, and redraw the balance of power in Formula One. As the wheels touched down on the tarmac near Red Bull's headquarters, both men remained quiet. There was no need to say it out loud. They both knew the future had just been set in motion. And the rest of the world had no idea what was coming. After an unusually discreet flight arranged under a veil of secrecy, with no press, no public flight logs, and using pseudonyms for the travel manifest, the 2 men touched down at a private airfield outside Milton Keynes just before dawn. The sky was still a deep blue, streaked with the earliest hints of sunrise. The hangar lights flickered on the tarmac like low embers in the cold morning air. Awaiting them was a single matte black Range Rover with tinted windows, idling in near-complete silence. No entourage. No welcoming committee. Just efficiency. Precision. Intent. Lewis Hamilton, clad in a black hoodie and baseball cap pulled low over his face, stepped out first. Beside him, Christian Horner kept a brisk pace, speaking in a quiet, animated tone as they made their way directly to the vehicle. Not a word was exchanged with the driver, who simply nodded and pulled away as soon as both men were inside. The roads were empty. Every turn was calculated to avoid any possibility of crossing paths with media or team personnel from rival outfits. Even the GPS tracking on the vehicle had been disabled. What was unfolding wasn't just a meeting, it was a covert operation. Upon arrival at Red Bull Racing's campus, they bypassed the main lobby entirely, instead slipping through a side entrance that had been used for years only by executives and special guests. There were no badges handed out, no logbooks signed. Everything had been pre-cleared by Horner himself. The building, though vast and typically buzzing with energy, was eerily quiet at this hour. Just a select group of senior personnel had been summoned, individuals who knew better than to speak, even among themselves, about what they were about to witness. The corridor lights dimmed automatically as they walked, casting elongated shadows on the polished floors. Every step echoed slightly in the stillness, punctuated only by the low hum of servers and climate control systems regulating the state-of-the-art wind tunnels and simulation bays deeper inside. Horner led Hamilton forward with the demeanor of a man not just guiding a guest, but escorting a game-changer. He wasn't trying to sell Red Bull to Lewis, he was already treating him like he belonged. They turned into the front atrium, a space more like a modern art gallery than a motorsport office, where the 2021 championship-winning RB16B still stood, suspended on a carbon fiber pedestal, wheels turned slightly, the scars of battle on its under tray preserved like relics from a war. Hamilton paused there for a breath longer than expected. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. It was a visual confrontation with a car that had defined perhaps the most controversial chapter of his career. The tension in his jaw said everything. Horner noticed. That, Horner said with a half-grin, nodding toward the car, could be you next year. Only faster. Only meaner. And with the number 1 on it, if that's what you want. Hamilton didn't respond immediately. He took one more look at the car, then turned and followed Horner without breaking stride. They entered the engineering wing next, where a handful of senior design figures were waiting in one of the high-security development rooms. Among them, the head of vehicle dynamics, the lead aerodynamicist, a specialist in carbon composite structures, and one of the simulation modelers who had previously worked with Aston Martin before being poached. Each of them had signed airtight NDAs. Not even Adrian Newey had been informed. This was strictly a Horner-driven initiative for now. On the table were early concept models for the next chassis, referred to internally only by code RBX. There were intricate C80 renderings on a curved digital display, wind tunnel data from scaled prototypes, and comparative simulations against current competitors under various theoretical regulations. Lewis sat down in front of it all, his expression unreadable, but his eyes flicked rapidly through the data. Front downforce numbers, yaw sensitivity profiles, cornering maps of Suzuka, Interlagos, Monaco. They showed him how the rear-end stability under braking was projected to outperform both Ferrari and McLaren's 2025 packages. There were detailed overlays comparing high-speed load retention between this concept and the current RB20. Every line of code, every calculation, everything had been prepared for one viewer, him. The engineers, despite being some of the most hardened minds in motorsport, exchanged glances between themselves. This was Lewis Hamilton, multiple-time world champion, the man who had been both their greatest rival and a source of respect. Seeing him now, seated in their inner sanctum, listening intently, asking precise questions, felt surreal. From there, Horner guided Hamilton through a lower-lit hallway that led to the assembly floor, a sacred zone in Red Bull racing, where ideas became machines. It was still early enough that only a few overnight shifts were present. The mechanics, dressed in the signature navy blue overalls, were preparing parts for testing. And then, all at once, they noticed him. The hum of drills stopped. Someone dropped a torque wrench. There was a stunned silence. Mechanics, most of whom had spent their careers pitting against Hamilton, now watched as he walked alongside their team principal. Christian broke the silence with a wry smile. "This is Lewis Hamilton, folks. Might want to get used to seeing him around here." A few nervous laughs followed, but the shock remained. Some nodded respectfully. One technician, perhaps without thinking, reached for his phone, only for a senior staffer to subtly shake his head. No photos. No proof. Just a moment none of them would forget. They passed into the hybrid lab next, where power unit simulations were being run against the upcoming FIA fuel blend regulation. Lewis was shown an early iteration of Red Bull Powertrain's new MGUK unit, smaller, more efficient, and designed with one eye on sustainable energy deployment. The idea wasn't just to impress him. It was to show him that Red Bull wasn't playing catch-up anymore. They were building a future without dependencies. A future they believed he could help lead. As the tour wound down, the two men found themselves in a quieter lounge space overlooking the test bays. Hamilton finally spoke, his voice low, contemplative. "This place. It's sharper than I expected. Lean. Focused. There's no noise here." Horner nodded. "That's by design. We learned to cut the fluff. Too much celebration slows you down. We don't dwell, we reload." There was no pitch. No formal offer that day. That wasn't the point of the visit. This was about chemistry. About the unspoken alignment of purpose. Hamilton wasn't looking for a retirement chapter. He was looking for a final war, one last crusade where he had the weapons, the freedom, and the edge. And Red Bull, they weren't just looking for a driver. They were looking for a legend who could make them feared again. Later that evening, under the cover of darkness and behind the frost glass doors of Red Bull's private executive suite near the outskirts of Milton Keynes, a meeting took place that would send seismic ripples across the entire world of Formula One. It wasn't on the public schedule. No PR cameras, no press officers. Just four individuals seated around a long obsidian black conference table in a soundproof room designed for high-stakes negotiations. The air inside was cold, filtered, almost too still, as if even the building itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Lewis Hamilton walked in first, unaccompanied, dressed simply in a dark jacket, no entourage, no noise, just focus. The room was already occupied by Christian Horner, sitting calmly at the far end of the table, Helmut Marko, the ever-watchful senior advisor with a dossier already open in front of him, Red Bull's chief legal counsel, and the team's director of driver contracts. No words were wasted. No handshakes, no small talk. A leather-bound binder sat in the center of the table, black minimal, with a single white label on its cover, Operation Typhoon. The name had been chosen with intention. Not as a marketing stunt, but as a symbol, a reflection of the calculated chaos they were about to unleash upon the paddock. Hamilton took a seat without hesitation and was handed the file. The contract was thick, nearly 50 pages of legal and strategic depth, each clause carved with surgical precision. This wasn't just a standard driver agreement. It was a chessboard designed to secure a new era. The terms were almost surreal. A 2-year guaranteed contract, structured with rolling extensions based on performance metrics that included pole positions, podiums, and development milestones. Full access to Red Bull's state-of-the-art simulator facility, including out-of-hours usage rights. Unprecedented veto power over potential future teammates, ensuring that Hamilton could influence not just the machinery, but the internal dynamics of the garage. A staggering share of championship bonuses, surpassing even the lucrative terms he'd once enjoyed at Mercedes. On top of that, a personal branding agreement that would merge the Hamilton and Red Bull Racing global platforms, joint merchandise, special edition products, and collaborative marketing campaigns across Asia, the Middle East, and the US. Hamilton didn't rush. He sat there, flipping through each page with practiced calm. The room watched in silence, nobody daring to interrupt his rhythm. His expression was unreadable, focused, contemplative. As he reached the final section, a slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Without a word, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver Montblanc pen, uncapped it slowly, and with a single confident motion, signed the final page. His initials, then his full signature. No hesitation. No second glance. Just like that, it was done. The pen clicked shut. A new chapter had begun. Horner leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming with restrained excitement. Marko gave a curt nod, not a smile, just quiet satisfaction, as if confirming that everything had gone exactly as anticipated. The legal counsel slid the binder back into a secure case. Everything about the meeting had been clinical, efficient, but now there was a flicker of electricity in the room, a mutual recognition that what they had just orchestrated was historic. As the clock inched toward midnight, Horner rose from his seat and extended a rare invitation. "Let's mark the occasion," he said. "I've arranged something fitting." What awaited was no ordinary dinner. They exited quietly through a back entrance and were driven in separate vehicles to Cliveden House, a centuries-old English manor now transformed into one of the country's most elite luxury hotels. Nestled in the Berkshire countryside, it was where royalty and global power brokers gathered when discretion was as important as luxury. A private dining salon had been prepared in advance. No staff lingering nearby, no interruptions permitted. The dinner menu had been customized days in advance, curated with Hamilton's dietary preferences and personal tastes in mind. It began with hand-dived scallops in lemongrass foam, followed by a delicate truffle risotto infused with aged Parmesan. The main course was roasted venison loin with blackberry reduction and celeriac puree. And to accompany it all, a 1990 Chateau Margaux, decanted hours earlier by the head sommelier himself. As the courses flowed, so did the conversation. But it wasn't just racing statistics and tire degradation curves. It was deeper, philosophical. Hamilton, glass in hand, spoke candidly about legacy, not in the sense of records or trophies, but in terms of impact. What it meant to evolve as a figure beyond the cockpit. What it meant to carry the responsibility of a generation of fans, drivers, and thinkers who looked to him as more than just a racer. Horner, uncharacteristically introspective, responded with stories of the early Red Bull era, about how they had built something out of nothing, how their DNA had always been about disrupting the order, breaking rules without breaking the sport. The most striking moment came between the second and third course, when Hamilton looked directly at Horner and asked, "You really believe this can work?" His voice wasn't skeptical, just open, searching. Horner didn't flinch. "I don't just believe it. I've bet everything on it." There was a long pause, not of discomfort, but of weight. Then Hamilton raised his glass, nodded once, and said, "Then let's make the whole world watch." By the time dessert arrived, a chilled pear soufflé with burnt honey ice cream and pistachio dusting, the deal was more than ink on paper. It was a pact. A convergence of two formerly opposing forces who had once battled in the fiercest title fights the sport had ever seen, now combining firepower toward a singular goal, rewriting the narrative of modern Formula One. As the night drew to a close, and the manor fell into silence, Hamilton stepped outside into the cold countryside air. He looked up at the sky, no stars visible, just a low-hanging mist rolling over the fields. The kind of night where everything feels still before the storm. And somewhere deep inside he knew, this wasn't just a new team. This was a transformation. And once the paddock woke up to the news, nothing in the sport would ever be the same again. Halfway through the discreet, meticulously orchestrated dinner in a private suite overlooking the quiet waters of Lake Geneva, Lewis Hamilton let out a low chuckle, quiet, but unmistakably laced with mischief, as he gently rotated the deep red swirl of his Barolo in the crystal glass. The candlelight caught the edge of the wine, painting soft flickers of crimson across the white linen tablecloth. The servers had retreated long ago. Phones were confiscated at the door. This wasn't a meeting meant to be documented, at least, not yet. "You know," Hamilton said with a slight grin, his eyes twinkling as he tilted his head just enough to show he was enjoying the moment more than he should, "Toto's going to absolutely lose it." Across the table, Christian Horner smirked, slowly placing his fork down beside an untouched medallion of venison. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, the trademark confidence of a man who'd navigated dynasties and detonated alliances written clearly across his face. "Oh, he'll act like it's fine," Horner replied, the corners of his mouth curling with understated delight. "He'll put on the usual performance, say he understands your decision, respects your legacy, all of it. But deep down..." Horner's voice dropped a tone, his words deliberate, soaked in the satisfaction of a long game coming to fruition. "It'll hit him like a punch to the ribs. Not because he didn't see it coming, but because, for the first time in over a decade, he couldn't stop it." Hamilton's eyes lingered on the wine a moment longer before leaning in, elbows on the table, voice lowered into a whisper reserved only for rooms this confidential. "He made me an offer, you know. Right after Monaco. No one's heard about it. Quiet. Private. Direct." Horner blinked, just once, but the flicker of intrigue was undeniable. He didn't interrupt. Hamilton continued, his voice even calmer now, almost surgical. 3-year deal. No media. No managers. Just him and me, one-on-one in his suite in Monte Carlo. He said the door's always open. He even framed it as a homecoming. The story writes itself, right? One last ride with Mercedes. redemption, closure, all the poetic stuff. A pause. Then Hamilton sat back, took a sip, let the moment breathe. And Horner asked, though the answer was already visible in the way Lewis smiled before he even replied. I said no, Hamilton said flatly. I couldn't go back. Not after how it ended. Not after Brazil. Not after the silence, the confusion, the months of no answers. You don't go back to the same book when you already know how it ends. And I'm not interested in rewriting chapters that never should have existed in the first place. Horner exhaled, letting the weight of those words hang in the space between them. There was no gloating. No premature celebration. Just mutual understanding between two tacticians who knew exactly how rare this alignment of stars had become. Hamilton wasn't just choosing a team. He was choosing a warpath. A new mission. A new mythology. And Red Bull, of all places, was the vessel. Outside the windows, the lake shimmered under the subtle moonlight, untouched by the chaos the rest of the motorsport world would soon erupt into. In this small, secluded world of secrets and billion-dollar stakes, everything remained still. For now. Inside, the sommelier returned briefly with the final pour of the evening, an aged 1990 vintage. No words were spoken as glasses were filled again. The moment didn't need commentary. As the dinner wound down, they clinked glasses gently beneath the soft amber glow of the dining room's antique chandeliers. The toast was wordless, but rich with implication. Hamilton's phone remained powered off, hidden away in a custom black case on the leather banquette. His communications team had already been instructed to inform media outlets that he was taking a brief personal retreat. No specifics, no schedule, no statements. His inner circle had been sworn to silence. Ferrari, as of this very moment, had no idea what was coming. Mercedes suspected nothing more than routine off-season negotiations. Even Red Bull senior leadership, outside of Horner and Helmut Marko, were still unaware that the biggest shift in modern Formula One history had just been initiated. But it was real. And irreversible. The groundwork was already being laid, legal teams checking contract language, PR strategists drafting multiple rollout scenarios, Red Bull Racing's lead designer discreetly updating cockpit dimensions to accommodate Hamilton's preferences without drawing suspicion. Every precaution was being taken. Every angle was covered. This was not a move being made on emotion. It was an execution of staggering precision, calculated to collapse an entire paradigm the moment it was revealed. And when it finally would be. When the embargo lifted, and the world awoke to images of Lewis Hamilton, the seven-time world champion, standing in front of the Red Bull logo, shaking hands with Christian Horner. It wouldn't just shock the motorsport community, it would fracture it. Social media would combust. Pundits would scramble to make sense of it. Former teammates, current rivals, and longtime critics would be forced to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about the trajectory of his career. What began as a whisper in a private dining room would become a global event, an eruption of disbelief, anger, admiration, speculation. It would raise questions about Ferrari's inner collapse, about Mercedes' loyalty, about Red Bull's ruthlessness, about the very structure of Formula One's political fabric. And above it all, it would redefine what the word legacy meant in this sport. Because this wasn't just a transfer. This wasn't just Hamilton jumping ships. This was the end of one era and the violent, unapologetic birth of another. A new alliance between two titans once thought to be irreconcilable, now aligned, now united, not just to win, but to dominate. To silence history. To command the future. The fuse was lit. The explosion hadn't happened yet. But it was inevitable. And when the blast came, it wouldn't just shake the foundations of Formula One. It would rewrite them.